He had planned to leave the moment the date began. A quiet dinner, a few polite exchanges, just enough to appease his sister. No more, no less. But the moment she was wheeled through the entrance, something shifted. Not pity, not shock, just curiosity laced with something he hadn't felt in years, a pull. She was calm, composed. Her hair framed her face like it had been brushed by soft hands that morning. Her eyes, they held stories. He stood, without thinking, not out of obligation, but respect. "You can relax," she said, her voice low and steady. "I know I'm not what you expected." Callan hadn't blinked. "No," he finally replied, "you're not. And somehow, that's the first thing I like about you. Have you ever met someone who quietly disrupted everything you thought you wanted, simply by being unapologetically themselves? Not with drama, not with theatrics, but with stillness, with truth. That was Norelle. She didn't need to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to, and that was exactly why he couldn't stop watching her. Callan was a man surrounded by brilliance, a tech giant, a father, a provider, a protector, but beneath the suits and strategy, his heart still lived in the ruins of a past he hadn't rebuilt. Until this moment, he thought that was enough. He had made peace with the silence that echoed after his daughter went to sleep each night. He didn't know that peace was just another name for loneliness until she looked at him. What he didn't know was that this woman, this stranger, carried more than grace and strength. She also carried a secret, one that would challenge everything he thought he was ready for. Before we begin this unforgettable story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you believe love can heal even the deepest wounds. Leave a comment below if someone unexpected ever changed your life. She didn't wait for him to pull out the chair. Instead, she adjusted her posture, settled herself gracefully at the table, and offered a smile that felt more like an invitation than a defense. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said. "Blind dates aren't exactly comfortable." Callan exhaled through his nose. "That makes two of us." The server approached, but he barely noticed. His mind kept orbiting around the contradiction in front of him, a woman so composed, so confident, and yet undeniably vulnerable. She asked him about his daughter first, not about his company, not the cars, not the money. "Tell me about her," she said. "Tell me about Alara." The way she said his daughter's name, like it deserved gentleness, unraveled something in him he didn't know was still wound tight. So he told her about the bedtime stories, the dragon who loved flowers, the fairy who didn't like wings, the mornings where she refused to brush her hair and laughed like it was a secret weapon. Norelle listened as though she were watching a painting come to life. And when she spoke about her work with children in therapy, her words weren't polished, they were pure. No rehearsed pitch, just quiet pride in helping young souls find their voice through color and clay. The rhythm between them was unexpected, not romantic, not yet, but it was honest. Still, Callan couldn't ignore the ache under her smile. There was something unfinished in her eyes. Not sadness exactly, more like a weight she hadn't yet put down. He didn't ask, not yet, but in the back of his mind he knew something was coming, something that might test every inch of compassion he had. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes watching the tiny swirl before speaking again. "I almost didn't come tonight." Callan looked up. "Why?" Norelle's gaze didn't lift from the cup. "Because I knew this would go one of two ways. You'd either see me and decide to leave, or worse, you'd stay, and I'd still have to tell you something that might make you wish you hadn't." Her honesty wasn't dramatic. It wasn't delivered with trembling lips or a staged pause. It was quiet, deliberate, braver than most people knew how to be. "I think I already know," Callan said. That made her smile, faintly. "Do you? You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. That's clear." Her expression softened, almost fragile for the first time. "But there's something else," she said, "and I need to tell you now. Not because I'm trying to scare you off, but because you deserve the truth before this becomes anything it's not." Callan leaned forward, elbows on the edge of the white tablecloth, face unreadable. He didn't interrupt. She placed her hand over her stomach, not dramatically, but protectively, almost subconsciously. "I'm pregnant," she said. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was still, like the breath before a decision. Callan blinked once. His throat tightened. But she wasn't done. "There's more," she said, voice steady but lower now. It's not just one. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Triplets. For the first time that night, Callan leaned back, not in disgust, not in fear, just reorienting himself inside the space he thought he understood. She swallowed. Her eyes finally met his again. And their father is your brother. For a moment, the world slowed. Not in that cliché movie scene way, but in the way grief slows you when it walks in uninvited. In the way memory tries to bargain with shock. Callan didn't speak. Norelle didn't push. The silence between them stretched, but it didn't break. Because something in her eyes had already told him the truth. She wasn't looking for rescue. She wasn't testing his character. She was risking her own heart to say what needed to be said. After a long breath, Callan asked one question. Did he leave when you told him? She nodded. No explanation, no goodbye. Just silence. Callan shut his eyes for a moment. Of course it was Lane. His brother had always been a storm that ruined things and disappeared before the damage could be measured. But this wasn't about Lane. It was about her, about the woman sitting across from him, carrying life inside her, yet sitting straighter than most people ever had in front of him. This wasn't how love was supposed to begin. But maybe that was the point. Some people show up when it's easy. Others arrive carrying stories they never asked for, and still choose to stay. Callan didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't getting up from this table. If you believe love isn't always simple, but it's always worth choosing, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Callan Waverley had built a life most people only dreamed of. Skyscrapers bore his company's name. Headlines followed his innovations. Venture capitalists praised his foresight. Analysts called him a genius. His net worth climbed every year, yet the weight in his chest never budged, because none of the power, the praise, the patents could bring back her. 3 years ago, his wife Juliet died in a car accident that Callan never saw coming. One phone call turned his world into a quiet corridor with no exit. She was on her way home from volunteering at a community workshop. The irony never left him. She died giving to others. He remembered the sound of his own voice as he answered the call. Flat, hollow. He didn't even ask for details. He just said, "Where is she?" And when they told him, all he said was, "Understood." The pain didn't announce itself. It just made itself a permanent resident. He didn't cry until 2 days later. He was folding a tiny sweater Alara had outgrown when it happened. Juliet used to fold the laundry in the evening, humming softly, asking Alara what dream she wanted to chase that night. Callan stood in that laundry room holding a sweater no bigger than his forearm, and broke. He didn't scream. He didn't fall to the floor. He just wept, quietly, the kind of weeping that doesn't echo, but seeps. In the months that followed, he lived with routine, not healing. Wake up, check Alara's lunch, boardroom, code reviews, home by 6, dinner, story time. Sleep, repeat. He never stopped being a father, but he stopped being anything else. His heart beat for one person only now, his daughter, the only light he had left. Alara Waverley was 6 years old and entirely unaware of how many hearts she held together with her laughter. She had Juliet's eyes, but Callan's eyebrows, serious little things that furrowed when she was concentrating. She approached the world with wonder and certainty, always asking questions no adult could answer and making up stories that made perfect sense to her and no one else. Callan had memorized her morning rituals like scripture. 2 pancakes, syrup only in the middle, strawberries, not touching the pancakes, 1 cartoon while he sipped coffee, and the final unbreakable rule, don't leave without saying the magic goodbye. He never did. Evenings were sacred. No meetings, no calls, no emails, just the two of them, a stack of mismatched blankets, and their favorite ritual, story time. But these weren't just any stories. They were made up, crafted in real time. Tales of dragons who were too shy to breathe fire, princesses who wore sneakers, robots who wanted to learn ballet. Alara always insisted they learn lessons along the way. "Daddy," she once whispered mid-story, "can the dragon say sorry to the tree he burned?" Callan nodded. "Of course. And the tree says that it forgives him, because fire can hurt, but it can also make light." She'd said it so casually, like it wasn't the wisest thing he'd ever heard. Callan had stared at her for a long moment. That night, after she fell asleep, he cried again, not from grief, but because he didn't know how someone so small could carry so much grace. Still, Juliet's absence lived in the spaces Alara didn't yet know to notice, in the silent moments after laughter, in the unspoken fear Callan felt every time Alara got sick, in the way he stayed awake longer than he needed to, just in case. He didn't talk about it, not to friends, not to therapists, not even to Kayla, but Kayla knew. She had been patient. For over a year, Kayla watched her brother live like a machine with a gentle voice, functional but untouched by anything outside of fatherhood and strategy. "Cal, you've done everything for her," she told him over dinner one night. "But when's the last time you did something for you?" "I don't need anything else," he said simply. She tilted her head. "That's not what I asked." He didn't respond. She let it go, for a while. But weeks later, as she watched him read yet another bedtime story alone in the corner of the living room, she made a quiet call. Kayla Waverly was never one to force things, but she also wasn't one to watch people she loved shrink quietly into themselves. She had adored Juliet too, mourned her. But she knew that grief didn't mean your life had to end when someone else's did. So she waited, watched, measured her words carefully. And then one afternoon, after picking Alara up from her art class, Kayla made a decision. She didn't ask Callan to go out. She told him it was already arranged. "Wait, what do you mean a blind date?" he said, setting down his coffee. "Kayla, no." She sat across from him, calm, unbothered. "Yes, no, she's not what you think. I'm not thinking anything, because I'm not going. You didn't ask about her. I don't need to. I'm not interested." Kayla folded her arms. "So you're planning on never dating again?" "I'm a father. You're also a man." Callan raised an eyebrow. "That's not a reason." "No," she agreed. "But maybe being lonely is—" He opened his mouth but couldn't quite argue. Kayla leaned forward. "She's kind, thoughtful. She works with kids. She doesn't know who you are in the press. She doesn't care about your portfolio." He stared at her. Kayla softened her voice. "You deserve to smile again, a real one. One that doesn't only appear when Alara tells a joke." He didn't answer her that night. But 3 days later, after Alara fell asleep with a tiny clay sculpture in her hand, a flower she'd made art therapy, he sat on the edge of her bed and whispered to the quiet air. "Maybe just one evening." He texted Kayla the next morning. "Set it up. Have you ever needed a little push to rediscover your smile? Let us know in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances." The restaurant Kayla chose sat quietly on the edge of the harbor, built from worn brick and dark wood, its windows overlooking a slow-moving river that shimmered beneath warm lighting. It wasn't loud. It wasn't trendy. That was the point. Callan sat at a small table near the back, one that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. He checked his watch. 6:59. He hadn't worn a tie, but he had still buttoned his collar. His sleeves were neatly rolled, cufflinks polished. Too formal? Maybe. But this wasn't his world, not anymore. Not the world of dating, introductions, small talk, and shared glances. That part of his life had been locked away the moment Juliet's laughter went silent. His fingers tapped lightly on the water glass. He wasn't nervous because of the woman. He was nervous because he had said yes. Because some part of him, however faint, still wondered if something good could happen to him again. At 7:03, the hostess approached. Her voice was low. "She's here, sir." He stood. And then, there she was, being guided gently through the entryway, not walking, seated in a wheelchair, her head held high, posture serene. She wore a soft navy dress with sleeves that danced slightly with her movement. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. No jewelry except for a thin gold bracelet. Her expression was composed, neither apologetic nor performative. Their eyes met across the room. Callan didn't move right away. He hadn't expected this. But she smiled, a small, knowing smile. The kind people offer when they're used to surprises and have long stopped being shaken by them. She raised one brow, amused. "Are you going to sit back down?" she asked. "Or are we eating standing up tonight?" Callan cleared his throat and moved around the table quickly, pulling the chair aside as Norelle guided herself closer. "You're not the only one who's nervous," she said, her voice light but steady. He gave a quiet laugh. Was it that obvious? No, she replied, settling in. But your cufflinks are almost shaking. He glanced down and gave a sheepish smile. The waiter brought water and menus. Norelle declined hers gently. I already looked it up online, she said. I have a mild obsession with preparation. Callan relaxed a little. Me too. I memorize restaurant floor plans. Doesn't serve much purpose, just habit. Their eyes met again. There was an ease there. Not forced, not flirty, just real. They began with the easy things. Food preferences, childhood memories, her favorite piece of music, Claire de Lune, his favorite childhood book, Where the Wild Things Are. They compared notes on books in silence, both quietly enjoying how comfortable it felt to not perform. So, Callan said, gently steering into the space he'd been curious about. How long have you been working in art therapy? Almost 7 years, she answered, though the last 2 have meant more than all the others. He didn't ask why. She told him anyway. I was in a car accident 2 years ago, spinal damage. L2 to S1. Callan's brow furrowed slightly. You can ask, she said. Everyone always wants to. He paused. How long were you a dancer? Her lips parted slightly, surprised, not by the question, but by the question itself. Since I was 4, she said softly. Professionally? 6 years before the accident. Ballet, modern. I used to choreograph for schools on the side. Do you miss it? Sometimes, she admitted. But I didn't lose my ability to teach expression. I just changed the medium. Now I teach children to tell their stories with color. That stopped him for a second, because without realizing it, she had just described something he'd been trying to do with Ilara for months, give her a way to name her feelings, especially the ones with no words. Callan leaned in a little, elbows lightly resting on the edge of the table. My daughter would love you. Norelle smiled. Ilara, right? Your sister mentioned her. You'd think she was 20, he said with a soft grin. She negotiates bedtime like a lawyer. Norelle chuckled. What's her latest case? She wants to sleep in a fort permanently. Claims it's more imaginative for dreams. That's a strong argument. She built it out of throw pillows, 3 chairs, and a pink bedsheet. I walked into the living room and couldn't find my sofa. They both laughed, easily this time. Not politely, not nervously. Callan's posture loosened. Norelle's eyes softened. Do you talk about her a lot on dates? She asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. I haven't been on any. She nodded slowly. Makes sense. You talk about her like she's your heart. She is, he said without blinking. There was a pause. Not awkward, just meaningful. That's rare, she said. To hear a man talk about his child like that, like she's not an extension of you, but her own world, one you're lucky to be invited into. He didn't know how to respond to that. So instead he asked, Do you work with children Ilara's age? Every day, she replied. Some are processing grief, others, anxiety. A few don't speak at all yet, but when you put a brush in their hand, something unlocks. He listened closely. The way she described healing through art wasn't abstract. It was tangible, real, like she'd lived it herself, which, he realized, she had. Dessert arrived. She ordered honey lavender creme brulee. Callan went with chocolate torte. When her first bite made her close her eyes for a moment in quiet appreciation, he smiled. That good? He teased. I earned this, she said seriously. That salad earlier was a betrayal. Callan laughed again. This time the sound came easier. Do you believe, she asked, brushing a crumb from her lip, that people are sent into your life for a reason? He paused. Sometimes, he said, but I'm not always sure what the reason is until much later. She nodded, as if that answer mattered more than he knew. And then, just for a moment, her smile faltered, only slightly. She glanced down at her hand, resting lightly on the tablecloth, and went quiet. Callan noticed, but he didn't press. He simply waited, and that's when she looked up, her eyes steadier than before. There's something I haven't told you yet, she said. Norelle set her spoon down gently. Her hands folded in her lap, and her gaze drifted for a moment, away from Callan, away from the soft light above their table. Somewhere inside herself, Callan waited, silent. He felt it before she said a word, the shift, the atmosphere narrowing, a stillness rising that carried weight. I wasn't going to come tonight, she said softly. He leaned forward, listening, but not because of the wheelchair or nerves. I've made peace with all of that. What I haven't made peace with is what I need to tell you now. Callan said nothing. The air between them tightened. I'm not just a woman in a chair, she continued. I'm not just an art therapist who paints with kids and listens more than she speaks. She placed one hand lightly on her stomach. No theatrics, no dramatics, just truth. I'm also pregnant. Callan didn't move. His brain registered the words, but they didn't settle. Not right away. It was like a stone dropped into deep water, taking time to reach the bottom. I know this changes things, she added, but I didn't want to lie. I couldn't. Callan blinked slowly. His voice, when it came, was quiet. How far along? 4 months. His eyes dropped to her hand on her belly. He hadn't noticed. Not once during the entire evening. She hadn't looked different, just radiant, strong, focused. He thought it was her confidence. Now he realized it was something else too. I see, he said. Norel's shoulders drew inward slightly. Just a bit. But she wasn't finished. There's more, she said, steadying herself. It's not just one baby. It's 3. The silence grew heavier. Not cruel, just full. Callan stared at her. She watched him with a kind of bravery that most people wouldn't recognize. The kind that doesn't look bold on the surface, but costs everything inside to hold. Callan leaned back in his chair, not abruptly but slowly, as if his body needed distance to think clearly. 3. She was carrying 3 children. That was already enough to shake the ground beneath him. But her voice, calm and composed, didn't allow him the time to fully settle before she spoke again. There's one more thing, Callan. He looked at her, not with anger, not with fear, just waiting. And then she said it. Their father is Lane. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. Not because he didn't hear her, but because he did. Completely. Lane, he repeated, flatly, not as a question. She nodded. Silence again. The kind of silence that didn't ask for music or rescue. The kind that held 2 people in separate storms. Norel's eyes remained steady. She didn't cry. She didn't reach for him. She didn't try to fix the moment or explain away the gravity of her words. I wouldn't have come tonight if I'd known who you were, she said. Your sister gave me only your first name, said you were kind, said you were guarded, said I might be what you needed. She exhaled slowly. I didn't realize until 2 days ago that Callan Waverley was the Callan Waverley. My brother, he murmured. Your brother, she confirmed. Callan closed his eyes for a long second, then opened them again. Does he know? He did, she said quietly. I told him. What did he say? Nothing. He disappeared. Phone off. Account closed. No goodbye. No explanation. Callan let that sit. It didn't surprise him, but it still hurt. Lane had always been unpredictable, irresponsible, floating through life like it owed him something. But this was different. Callan folded his hands in front of him, staring at the flicker of a candle between them. He wasn't angry at her. That much was clear. But something in his chest tightened. A memory, a history, a lifetime of trying to fix things Lane broke without warning. And now here he was again, picking up shattered pieces he didn't drop. But this time, the pieces had a heartbeat. I thought about not showing up, Norel said. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles had gone slightly pale where they rested near her glass. I imagined the judgment, the discomfort, and I knew there was a chance this would end before it began. Callan looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. And yet, you came. I did. Why? She hesitated. Because, somewhere deep down, I believed your sister. She said you were steady. She said if anyone could understand pain that didn't come with clear answers, it was you. Callan was silent, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't trust anything he could say too quickly. The truth was, he wasn't angry at her. He was angry at Lane, at the pattern, at the vanishing act. But Norel, she was not a mistake. She was not chaos. She was standing, or sitting, in front of him with a level of grace most people never muster, even when life plays fair. And hers hadn't. Callan finally spoke. I don't know what I'm feeling right now, but I know what I'm not. She waited. I'm not walking away. A flicker of something, relief, maybe disbelief, passed through her eyes. I can't make promises tonight, he added. I don't even know what this means yet. She nodded slowly. I'm not asking for anything. He leaned back. I know. That's what makes me want to stay. The candle on the table fluttered slightly in the evening draft. There was no music playing anymore, just the low murmur of voices, silverware clinking, the rhythm of a restaurant winding down for the night. But at their table, something had just begun. What would you do at this moment? Could you forgive? Could you stay? Leave a comment below and let's talk. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who believes love is more than perfect timing. Callan stood alone in his study later that night, the soft hum of Alara's sound machine coming faintly through the hall. He hadn't turned the lights on. The city flickered beyond the window, casting faint movement across the walls. He still hadn't removed his jacket. Norel's words echoed, not in anger, not in confusion, but with the kind of depth that sat down and refused to leave. Their father is Lane. He poured a single glass of whiskey and stared at it on the desk for a long time before taking a sip. Not because he needed the drink, but because he needed something solid to hold. His mind drifted. Backwards, back to Lane. They had shared bunk beds as boys. Lane always took the bottom, even when he got older. Said he didn't like the idea of falling in his sleep. Callan teased him about it, until Lane threw a pillow at his face so hard it knocked his book off the top bunk. They'd laughed until their sides hurt. But laughter faded as they grew. Where Callan was disciplined, Lane was impulsive. Where Callan followed structure, Lane bent rules. Where Callan listened, Lane charmed. Lane always said, life will figure itself out. Callan used to admire that, until it stopped being carefree and started becoming careless. He remembered the first time Lane crashed one of his business meetings uninvited. Back in the early years of the company, when it was still all servers and sweat, Lane had shown up with unshaven confidence and a brilliant idea involving NFTs and scooters. He'd taken over the whiteboard, embarrassed the investors, and cost Callan 2 major backers. When confronted later, Lane just laughed and said, "Come on, you'll bounce back." He didn't get it, because he'd never had to build anything that could be broken. And yet, even after all that, Callan never fully shut the door. He wanted to believe Lane would mature, that eventually he'd choose something, someone to stay for. But now, knowing Lane had disappeared, the moment responsibility appeared. Callan didn't feel surprised. He felt tired. The next morning, Callan sat across from Kayla at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched. She studied him. He looked distant, but not cold, like someone who had been forced to look at his own reflection and hadn't yet decided what to do with what he saw. "She told you," Kayla said, not asking. Callan nodded once. "And?" "She's carrying Lane's children," he said plainly. 3 of them. Kyla didn't react with surprise. She didn't hide that. She didn't hide anything. She didn't have to, Callan replied. She already knew how much it would cost her just to say it. Kyla's eyes softened. "And you're here, not running. That says something." He looked at her. "She's not the enemy, Cal." He didn't respond. She leaned forward, voice lower. "You can't hold her accountable for his failure." Callan looked away. His jaw clenched slightly. Not in anger, just in exhaustion. "I'm not blaming her." "Then, what's holding you back?" Callan turned the mug slowly in his hands. "Because I keep thinking about those babies," he said. "They're innocent. They didn't choose any of this. And I know what it feels like to lose someone without warning. I can't imagine never having someone show up at all." He paused, then looked at Kayla again. "But I also don't know if I'm strong enough to walk into something this heavy." Kayla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That's exactly why you should." That night, Callan tucked Alara into bed like he always did. She'd drawn something earlier, her and him, standing next to a woman with long brown hair in a wheelchair. Beside the woman were 3 small stick figures. Callan stared at it for a moment before asking, "Who's this?" "That's Norel," Alara said. His breath caught. "She helped me mix purple with my fingers today," she added. "She said purple's the color of bravery." Callan raised an eyebrow. "She did, huh?" "Uh-huh," Alara nodded. "Is she going to be my second mommy?" Callan stared at Alara's drawing a little longer. The way she'd colored Norel's dress soft blue. The way she'd drawn herself holding both their hands. 3 tiny figures nestled nearby, wrapped in hearts. He ran his fingers lightly over the paper. "She's not your mommy," he said softly. Alara looked up at him with her wide, curious eyes. "I know, but could she be?" Callan didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him needed to pause, to really feel what this meant. Alara didn't understand the weight of the question, but somehow her heart had already arrived at the answer. And Callan, he wasn't sure what kind of man he wanted to be until that very moment. Not the one who left when things got complicated. Not the one who let someone else's failure define his own choices. Not the one who confused fear with wisdom. He looked at his daughter, this small, powerful soul who had survived her mother's absence with imagination and courage, and realized something simple, yet profound. He didn't need time. He needed truth. Later that night, Callan sent a message. "I don't know where this goes, but I'd like to find out, if you'll let me." He stared at the screen before pressing send. Then he walked back into Alara's room and kissed her on the forehead. She stirred slightly in her sleep and whispered, half dreaming, "Is Norel coming back?" Callan smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think she is." The art studio sat behind a children's center nestled between two bookshops. Quiet, unassuming, and filled with light from tall windows. Inside, the walls were alive with color. Finger-painted suns, glittered handprints, clay animals with lopsided ears. It was imperfect and beautiful in the way only rooms made for children could be. Callan held Alara's hand as they stepped in. Her eyes lit up instantly. "Daddy, look, that elephant has buttons for eyes." Norel glanced up from the craft table, where a boy in a red hoodie was, quietly molding a lump of clay into what he claimed was a spaceship. "Hey, there's my new artist," she said, smiling at Alara. "I saved you a seat next to me." Alara looked up at her father for approval. He nodded. "Go ahead." She skipped across the room, curly hair bouncing behind her, and sat beside Norel as if they'd known each other for years. Callan watched, uncertain at first. But within minutes, Alara was already telling Norel about a dream she'd had involving a purple lion who wanted to be a dentist. Norel listened like it was the most important story in the world. An hour passed. They painted with their hands. They made bracelets out of dried pasta. They laughed so loudly the shy boy finally cracked a smile. And Callan? He stayed in the corner, watching. He'd never seen his daughter so open with someone who wasn't family. He'd never seen someone who could enter Alara's world without having to be invited first. After the session, as Alara washed her hands, Norel wheeled herself over beside Callan. "She's got an imagination that doesn't know the meaning of limits," she said. "She gets that from her mom." Norel tilted her head slightly. "And her kindness?" Callan met her eyes. "That's mine." They both smiled. It started with one visit a week. Then, two. Then, without realizing it, Callan and Alara were spending most of their evenings at Norel's little house on Oak Street. Her living room didn't feel like a gallery or a showroom or anything curated. It felt lived in. Safe. A home where nothing had to be perfect to be beautiful. One evening, Norel unfolded a patchwork quilt over Alara's legs while they sat on the couch reading. Alara looked up. "Did you make this?" "Every stitch," Norel said. "Some of the pieces are from old clothes. Some are from students' paintings." Callan raised an eyebrow. "You quilt paint?" She smiled. "Sometimes. The stories kids tell through color, I didn't want to lose them. So I started cutting little pieces out of dried fabric paintings and sewing them into memory blankets." Alara gasped. "Can I make one?" Norel nodded. "We'll start with a single square. You choose the colors. I'll show you the rest." Their quilt project became a ritual. Tuesday afternoons were now for mixing colors, cutting pieces, and listening to the same instrumental playlist that played softly through Norel's speakers. Alara would hum along, occasionally getting paint on her nose, which made Norel laugh without fail. Callan would sit at the edge of the room, laptop open but barely touched. Every so often he'd catch Norel watching him with that quiet calm she carried, and something else he didn't quite know how to name. One night, after Alara had fallen asleep curled under her unfinished quilt, Callan walked out onto the porch where Norel sat. The evening was quiet. He took a seat beside her. "She feels safe with you," he said. Norel looked down for a moment. "So do you." That evening on the porch stretched longer than either of them intended. The night air was cool, but not cold. The kind of stillness that made words feel heavier, more honest. Callan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking out at the soft halo of porch light brushing the garden below. "I've spent so long being afraid of feeling anything outside of Alara," he said, "because everything after Juliet felt disloyal." Norel didn't interrupt. He glanced over at her, but lately, he continued, "When I see you with her, when I see how she rests in your presence, it doesn't feel like replacing anything. It just feels like adding something I didn't think I could have again." Norel's eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. "People think grief is all about crying," she said softly. "But the hardest part is learning to let softness return, without guilt." He nodded. The silence settled again. Not awkward, not forced, just full. Then Callan looked at her, truly looked, and something passed between them. Gentle, steady, and quiet. He leaned in, slowly, and kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't unsure. It was permission. A moment that said, "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." When they pulled back, her hand remained on his cheek. "I wasn't ready," she whispered. "Me neither," he replied. "But I wanted to." The next morning, Callan found a headline waiting in his inbox. "Billionaire seen with mysterious woman. Sources claim she's pregnant with brother's children." There were photos, blurry but unmistakable. Norel wheeling herself beside Alara, who was proudly holding a finger painting like a trophy. Callan just behind them. He stared at the image for a long time. And then, he closed the article without finishing. The article spread faster than he expected. Within 48 hours, it made its way onto tech forums, gossip sites, and morning radio shows. Commentators speculated, shareholders whispered, and a handful of executives from his board sent carefully worded emails asking if he might want to get ahead of the narrative. He didn't respond to most of them, but he did pick up the phone when his assistant asked if he still wanted to attend the education fundraiser at the Children's Museum that weekend. "Yes," he said, "I'm going. And I'm not going alone." That Saturday, Callan arrived at the museum hand in hand with Alara. Norel wheeled beside them, glowing, not with polish but presence, a quiet strength that didn't waver beneath the eyes turned in her direction. They posed for no cameras, but when a reporter stepped forward and asked if the rumors were true, Callan turned. He could have walked on, said no comment. Instead, he paused, looked her squarely in the eye. "Everything you've heard, it's not the story." He gestured toward Alara, who stood beside Norel, clutching a paintbrush she'd just been handed. "This is the story." Later that evening, at a formal dinner meant to honor donors and community partners, Callan stood to give his planned remarks. He set the printed speech aside, took a deep breath, and spoke from somewhere deeper. "I've spent most of my adult life being measured by numbers," he said. "Revenue, growth, market share." He paused. "But there are no charts that can measure what it means to show up when it's inconvenient. There are no graphs for grace, or loyalty, or love." A few heads turned. Others stilled completely. "I'll take the criticism," he said, "because if the worst thing people can say about me is that I chose to care, then I'm okay with that." He sat down beside Norel, whose hand slid quietly into his. "And that was enough. If you believe love is about staying, not who came first, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below if you've ever stood by someone the world told you to walk away from." The headline hit harder than the first. "Billionaire dates brother's pregnant ex, who really owns the Waverly legacy." It wasn't subtle, it wasn't kind, and it wasn't going away. The article made its rounds like wildfire. They pulled images from years past, Lane laughing with investors, Callan at charity events, vague shots of Norel wheeling across public spaces, and twisted them into a tangled narrative built for outrage. Rumors followed fast. Callan was taking responsibility because of guilt. He was buying silence through comfort. Norel was a long-game manipulator. Lane had warned him privately to back off. None of it was true, but none of it needed to be. The board called an emergency meeting. It wasn't framed as one. On the calendar it read, "Strategic Brand Positioning Review." But when Callan entered the room, he saw the expression on every executive's face. This wasn't about tech. It was about control. An older board member cleared his throat first. "Callan, we respect your right to a personal life, but..." Callan didn't flinch. "Let's not dress this up. You're worried about headlines." A younger VP leaned forward. "We've already had calls from 3 major investors." "And what exactly did they say?" that your relationship presents unnecessary volatility. Callan tilted his head. Volatility? They want to know what your long-term involvement with this woman means for the company's future. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply said, "It means the future includes integrity." The press conference had originally been scheduled to announce a product launch. That changed. By the time Callan stepped up to the podium, the room was brimming with reporters, tech journalists, lifestyle, bloggers, a few who clearly hadn't followed his work but had memorized every line of the latest gossip thread. He stood in a charcoal jacket, no tie, shirt sleeves cuffed. The room fell still as the microphones flicked on. "I'll keep this brief," he began, voice steady. "There's been a lot said about me lately. Some of it true, most of it not. But the one thing I haven't done is answer any of it, until now." He paused, meeting the eyes of the press pool without flinching. "I've been called a fool, a liability, a man led by emotions, and maybe I am. But if the cost of staying grounded in what I believe is public discomfort, then I'm willing to pay it." Cameras clicked. A few pens paused mid-sentence. He continued. "The woman you're all writing about is named Norelle. She is kind, she is brave, she tells the truth when it's hard, and she didn't ask for a spotlight, she asked for a life where her children would be loved." Callan let the words sit, then added, firmly, "I'd rather be criticized for loving too deeply than praised for keeping a cold heart." No one interrupted, because there was nothing to interrupt. The next day, Callan canceled his schedule and took Norelle to her appointment. Her doctor gave the news gently she needed to be placed on partial bed rest. The pregnancy had reached a critical point. Carrying 3 children was putting more strain on her spine than anticipated. "I'll adjust everything," Callan said immediately. And he meant it. The following week, Norelle moved into the guest wing of Callan's estate. It wasn't an announcement, it was a decision. He'd had the room prepared with soft lighting, adaptive furniture, and access to every comfort she might need. A nurse visited daily. A nutritionist reviewed every meal. But the most important detail wasn't medical, it was emotional. Every evening, like clockwork, Callan arrived home early. He would sit at the edge of her bed, a book in one hand, Alara curled beside him, her head resting gently on Norelle's side. They didn't talk about the world outside those walls. Not the headlines, not the speculation, not Lane. Because what they were building, slowly, gently, didn't belong to anyone else. One night, Norelle tried to protest. "You don't have to do all this," she said, voice low. "I know," Callan replied. "Then why?" "Because I choose to," he interrupted gently. "Because love isn't earned through convenience. It's proven in the hard places." She looked away. Callan placed a hand lightly over hers. "You've carried enough," he said. "Let someone carry you now." He didn't speak those words for applause. He didn't offer comfort with cameras nearby. There were no press releases, no statements to clarify his decision. Just presence. Nights spent reading softly as she drifted to sleep. Mornings where Alara brought her drawings to hang above the bed. Quiet breakfasts, shared in the warmth of a room where no judgment was welcome. The outside world wasn't quiet, but inside, something sacred grew. Not just safety, trust. The house had grown quieter, not out of distance, but out of preparation. Every night, Callan settled into the oversized armchair beside Norelle's bed. Some nights, he read aloud. Others, they just listened to the steady rhythm of Alara's breathing through the baby monitor across the hall. Norelle's body was tired. Her back ached constantly. Her legs stiffened easily. But what she remembered most during those final weeks wasn't the discomfort. It was the way he never missed a single night. He sat with her, spoke gently to her belly, rubbed lavender oil into her palms when she couldn't sleep, held her hand through the silences when nothing needed fixing, just feeling. Sometimes Alara would sneak in before bedtime and nestle between them. She'd place her ear against Norelle's belly and whisper, "Hi, babies, we can't wait to meet you." One night she brought a notepad and 3 crayons. "Let's name them," she said, with the authority of a tiny general. "1 name each, and no boring names." Norelle laughed. "What counts as boring?" "Anything with more than 5 letters, Alara said. "And nothing that sounds like broccoli." Callan raised an eyebrow. "I don't think broccoli is a name." "It could be," she whispered. "For a grumpy one." They stayed up past her bedtime that night, making lists. Alara suggested Zoe, Kai, and Jet. Norelle liked Ivy, Elias, and Luca. Callan wrote them all down in his phone. Later, when Alara had drifted off under the half-finished quilt at the foot of the bed, Norel turned to him. "They'll know they were wanted," she said softly, "even before they opened their eyes." Callan looked at her, exhausted, beautiful, full of courage, and replied, "They already know." It was just past midnight when Norel woke to the pressure building in her lower back again. The room was quiet. Alara had long since gone to bed, and Callan was still sitting nearby, half asleep with a book on his lap. She shifted slightly and winced. He looked up instantly. "Are you okay?" She nodded, forcing a breath through clenched teeth. "Just the usual." "I'm fine." He set the book down and came to her side. "You don't have to do this every night," she whispered. "I know." Her voice cracked a little. "I mean this, all of this, the care, the effort, the quiet watching." He met her eyes. "You don't have to carry it with me." Callan paused, then lowered himself onto the bed beside her, slowly, carefully. "I'm not here because I have to be." She didn't speak, just listened. "I'm here because I want to be. Because love isn't about obligation," he said. "It's about choice." Norel looked away for a moment, her eyes glistening. "I'm not used to people staying when things get heavy." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm staying." She turned her head slowly to face him again. "I'm scared," she confessed. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not enough? What if the kids grow up and wonder where their real father is?" Callan exhaled softly. "Then we'll tell them the truth," he said. "That their real father left, and the right one stayed." Later that night they lay in bed side by side. Norel journaled quietly, small, delicate handwriting across soft cream pages. Callan hummed a melody he used to sing to Alara as a baby. And when her hand began to cramp, he took the pen from her and wrote the last line she dictated. "They are not here yet, but they are already loved beyond reason." It was almost dawn when the first contraction came. Norel shifted beneath the blanket and froze, her breath catching. This one wasn't like the others. It didn't roll in slowly. It gripped and held. She closed her eyes and placed a hand on her stomach. A moment later, Callan stirred. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice didn't follow. "Another one?" he asked, gently. She nodded again, slower this time. He sat up fully, calm and quiet. "Timer?" he asked. She handed him her phone. The next wave arrived 12 minutes later, then 8, then 6. By the time Alara woke up, the sun was barely up, and Norel was sitting, upright, propped against pillows, breathing in slow counts. Alara ran to her side. "Is it time?" "Maybe," Norel whispered. "But don't worry, we've got help." Callan crouched beside her. "Are you scared?" Norel gave a small smile. "No, just steady." He kissed her forehead. "You're the bravest person I know." Before the car arrived, Alara insisted on something. She went to her room and returned with 3 small drawings. "I made one for each baby," she said. "So they know we were waiting." Callan helped tuck the papers into the overnight bag. He looked at Norel, sweat beading on her forehead, her hand gripping the armrest, yet calm, centered, grounded in something greater than fear. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said. Then she looked at him, her voice steady. "But I trust you to be." He took her hand and whispered, the only thing that mattered now, "We've got them." All 4 of them. The hospital room was cool and softly lit, the rhythmic beeping of machines, forming a quiet backdrop beneath the medical team's calm instructions. Callan stood at Norel's side, gown over his clothes, mask tucked under his chin. His left hand was in hers. She squeezed it with a strength he didn't know she had left. Her breathing came in hard, deliberate bursts. "You're doing great," he said, voice close to her ear. She nodded faintly, sweat dripping along her hairline. Another contraction came, sharp, sudden, and deep. She clenched her eyes shut and gasped. The nurse glanced at the monitor. "They're close, very close." The OB entered briskly, gloves already on. "All right, Norel, we're ready for the first one." She nodded through the pain, blinking back tears. Callan brushed her hair back gently. "I'm right here. I can't tell if I'm terrified or exhausted," she whispered. "Probably both," he whispered back. "But I've never seen anyone fight like you." Minutes later, the first cry filled the room. A boy. Strong lungs. Eyes wide open. Callan's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Norel, who exhaled with trembling relief. She didn't speak, but her eyes spoke everything. The nurse held the baby briefly before moving to the warmer. Beautiful little guy, 5 pounds, 9 ounces. Norel nodded faintly. That's Kai, she whispered. It means ocean, for strength and depth. 10 minutes later, the second baby came. A girl. Her cry was higher, shorter, followed by a small hiccup. Callan choked back a laugh and wiped his cheek. He hadn't realized he was crying. Norel smiled weakly. That's Ivy. Why Ivy? He asked. Because it grows even when no one watches it, she replied. Then came the last one. The doctor grew more focused, the energy in the room tighter. The baby's position had shifted, and it took longer. Norel gripped Callan's hand so tightly he thought she might break it. Almost there, he whispered. One more. Another push. A long pause. Then a cry. Softer, but sure. Another boy. The nurse smiled. He's small, but healthy. Callan leaned down. Name? Norel nodded, voice barely audible. Elias. He repeated it. Elias. 3 children. Breathing. Crying. Alive. And their father was nowhere in sight. Callan stood still for a long time after they wrapped Elias in his blanket. 3 bassinets lined the far side of the room. Nurses bustled around, adjusting monitors and making soft notes on charts. Norel lay silent, her hand now resting loosely on his. She did it, he whispered to himself, but a deeper voice inside corrected him. They did it. Together. When the nurse asked if he wanted to hold them, Callan didn't hesitate. He walked to the warmer, slipped on gloves, and picked up Kai first. The baby blinked up at him, tiny fists clenched, nose wrinkling. Callan's voice was barely a breath. Hi there. He held Ivy next. Her eyes were already closed, peaceful as if she knew this world was safer than expected. Then Elias, the smallest of the 3, fragile, but already fighting to stay awake. Callan pressed his lips to the boy's head. I've got you, he whispered. All of you. Later that day, when the medical team finished checking Norel's vitals, Alara was allowed to visit. She walked in, small shoes tapping gently against the tile, holding her favorite stuffed bunny in one hand. Callan crouched to meet her. Are you ready to meet them? Her eyes widened as she looked past him to the bassinets. They're so tiny. He smiled. You were once too. She stepped closer to Norel, who gave a soft, tired smile. Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? Alara asked. I'm good, just very, very tired. The girl looked at the 3 babies, then at Callan. Are they mine now? He paused, surprised. You mean, are they my brothers and sister now? She asked again. Callan nodded. If you want them to be. She looked again, then reached out her bunny and tucked it gently beside Ivy's blanket. They can have Bun Bun tonight, so they're not scared. That evening, Callan sat beside Norel's bed. The babies had been taken to the nursery for their next check. Norel turned her head toward him. You don't have to stay the night, you know. He laced his fingers through hers. I've spent too many nights alone already, he said. I don't want to miss this one. She blinked, fighting sleep. You sure? Absolutely. He kissed her temple. Because this is where my heart finally fits. 6 months had passed since the triplets arrived. 6 months of sleepless nights, laughter-filled. Mornings and more bottles, burp cloths, and lullabies than Callan had ever imagined possible. But through it all, he never left the room. Not once. The courtroom was quiet that morning. No chaos, no press, no board members watching from corners. Just a small judge, 2 lawyers, and a stack of neatly typed documents. Kai, Ivy, and Elias were tucked into a double stroller, all dressed in light blue onesies. Callan held Alara's hand as they stood before the bench. Norel sat nearby, calm but visibly emotional, a folded tissue clutched in her palm. The judge looked over the papers, then at Callan. You understand what this means, Mr. Waverly? Callan nodded. That these children become yours in every legal, financial, and parental sense. He nodded again, firmer this time. I don't need paperwork to know that, he said quietly. But I'm honored to make it official. The judge smiled. Then as of today, Kai Waverly, Ivy Waverly, and Elias Waverly are legally your children. Norel cried quietly. Alara whispered, We're a real team now. They chose a place where the wind could be heard and the world felt far away, a small stretch of land near the cliffs overlooking the ocean. No audience, no cameras, no extravagance. Just a white arch, a few chairs, and the sound of waves meeting stone. Alara wore a soft cream dress and scattered tiny white petals down the aisle with exaggerated care, glancing behind her every few steps to make sure no one had tripped on them. Callan stood at the altar with Elias in his arms. Ivy was in Norel's lap, and Kai was babbling happily with the officiant's tie between his fingers. They didn't have a wedding party. They didn't need one. The people who mattered were already there. When it was time, Callan took both of Norel's hands and gently kissed her knuckles. "I didn't expect you," he said softly, "and I didn't think I'd ever get to feel whole again. But you didn't fix me. You simply stood beside me and reminded me that healing didn't have to be rushed, that love wasn't something to fear. It was something to build." Norel's voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "I've known loneliness. I've known pain. And for a long time, I thought maybe those would always be my story. But then you walked in, and you didn't see a woman in a chair. You saw someone worthy of staying for." A soft breeze passed between them. She continued, "You gave my babies a name. You gave me a home. And every night you sat beside me when you didn't have to. That was a vow long before today." The officiant smiled. They kissed quietly, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for an audience. Later, as the guests shared quiet toasts and Alara danced barefoot in the grass with Ivy cradled in her arms, Callan sat back in his chair with Elias asleep on his chest. "You look full," Norel whispered. "Not just full," he replied. "Finally, settled. Some people spend their lives chasing a kind of love that sparkles bright but burns fast. But Callan Waverly found something better, a quiet, rooted love. One built on choice, on presence, on staying even when it's hard. If this story touched you, if you believe love after pain is not only possible but powerful, subscribe now, share this with someone who needs hope, and leave A in the comments. Sometimes love doesn't knock. Sometimes it arrives quietly, without fanfare, without permission, without even standing. Callan Waverly never expected to find love again, let alone with someone who carried both physical scars and the weight of another man's choices. But what he found with Norel wasn't just love. It was truth, wrapped in honesty. It was courage, built through vulnerability. And it was family, defined not by DNA, but by devotion. What this story reminds us: 1. Love doesn't always follow a plan. Sometimes it enters through a side door, quietly, carrying its own history and heartbreak. But that doesn't make it less real. In fact, those unexpected loves, the ones that catch us off guard, are often the ones that change us most deeply. Callan didn't go searching for Norel. She wasn't who he expected. But her story, her strength, her presence, awakened something he thought had been buried forever. 2. Judgment is easy. Compassion is braver. The world will always have opinions. There will always be whispers, headlines, and sideways glances. But judgment is lazy. It assumes without understanding. Callan chose compassion. He didn't dismiss Norel for her past. He didn't run from her pain. He stayed. That's not weakness. That's courage in its purest form. 3. Family isn't built by blood. It's built by choice. Lane vanished. Callan stayed. The triplets didn't grow in his life by biology, but by belief. He showed up when it mattered, and that presence made him a father in every way that counts. Family is who shows up, who protects, who listens, who loves when it's hard, when it's messy, when it's real. 4. Healing doesn't begin when everything is fixed. It begins when we stop hiding. Norel could have stayed home that night. She could have kept her story tucked away out of fear or shame. But she chose to show up. She chose honesty over comfort. And in doing so, she invited healing, not just for herself, but for Callan too. Healing isn't loud. It's not instant. But it begins the moment we tell the truth. 5. Every child deserves to be loved, fully and without condition. Kai, Ivy, Elias. They didn't ask for complicated beginnings. They didn't come with guarantees or simplicity, but they were met with arms that held them, eyes that saw them, and a heart that called them home. Every child deserves that, no matter their origin, no matter the story that came before. So if you're listening to this wondering if your story is too broken, if your past disqualifies you from being loved, or if your pain is too loud to be heard, This is your reminder you are still worthy of a beautiful chapter. Even if you don't walk in the same way, even if you carry a story that feels too complicated, even if love hasn't looked like what you imagined, it's still possible. And sometimes, the heart finds home in the most surprising of places. If this story touched you, share it. If it reminded you that love is worth choosing, leave a heart in the comments. And if you believe someone else needs this kind of hope, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's spread stories that remind us we all still have something beautiful waiting.